So I'm very honored and pleased to welcome these guys, and we'll introduce them in turn and just kind of dig in on some questions. So I'm going to start with Jennifer, since she's right here. I met Jennifer probably, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago or so. And I've asked Jennifer to wear two hats today because she recently made a transition, a professional transition from executive director of the Cherry Stone Angel Group, which is, I think, arguably the biggest, most established angel group in the Providence area. There are a couple of other angel groups that are less well organized and whatnot. And the Cherry Stone Angel Group was around for quite a while, and I think fair to say they felt like they were maybe a little bit adrift on process, and they hired Jennifer to be the executive director not long after you finished your college stuff. How in the world did you become director of an angel group so quickly out of school?
Yeah, so it was a lot of luck.
Luck?
So I started as an intern. A professor of mine made an introduction to the manager at the time for Cherry Stone, and so I started as an intern, and then when I got out of school, I worked for them part-time.
What did you study in school?
Finance.
Finance, okay. So you were a numbers person naturally, okay.
Yeah, so I was between Wall Street or venture. I'm glad I went to the venture side. So I started with them right out of school, worked with a portfolio company as well who was in the business of accelerating tech startups here within Rhode Island. So got to see it a little bit from the entrepreneur side and then also from the investor side. And then in 2014, I joined them as their executive director full-time.
And what are you doing now?
So I joined Altus Ventures, which is a corporate venture arm for a large dental insurer here in the state. So we make strategic investments in the oral health space. In the oral health space. So we don't have any dental deals for you. It's a pretty niche market.
In B-Lab, so unfortunately I'm not going to fill your pipeline with dental deals today.
That's quite all right. We like to invest in Rhode Island startups as well. Because of us being here in the community.
Gotcha.
And we also launched an internal startup that we're spinning out now across the dental space. So that's been very humbling to learn from the entrepreneur side of the house.
Are you part of that venture as well?
I am.
Good.
So it's about 80-20.
Okay, we're going to come back and ask you about that.
A lot of that.
But one question I told these guys I was going to ask them was, how many pitches have you listened to? Just an estimate, and you've been in the biz kind of, shall we say, 5 years?
Yeah, it'll be well, it's 7 in May.
7, so. Okay, 7 years. So how many pitches would you estimate you've listened to?
Probably about like 2,500 maybe, because it was roughly somewhere between 300 and 500 a year.
300 to 500 per year. Okay. And how many deals closed?
Companies and not rounds, probably.
Yeah, let's do companies. So the distinction, what's the distinction between a company and a round?
So a company is a company, and then they usually raise 3 or 4 rounds of capital.
Okay, so let's do companies, not rounds. How many company closings did you see, would you say, out of 2,500 pitches?
Probably 15, maybe.
Somebody do the math on that for me real quick. So 15.
It's a big funnel.
It's a big funnel with very steep sides. So
yeah, we do about 3 to 4 new deals a year.
And that includes inside of Cherry Stone?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
1.6%.
Thank you. Appreciate it. A little bit of computation. And since you opened your big mouth, now we'll introduce you. I'm very happy to have Thorne Sparkman, who's the managing director of the Slater Tech Fund here in Rhode Island. What the heck is the Slater Tech Fund? And then we'll get to how many pitches you've listened to.
Okay, the Slater Technology Fund is a seed stage venture capital fund. We focus on software, energy, and life sciences technology investments at the seed stage. So that's investments as tiny as $50,000 and as big as $1 million. And a lot of the money that we have invested over the years comes from the state of Rhode Island, and we couldn't find any good deals outside of Rhode Island. So we focus entirely on Rhode Island-based technology companies. So I think I've probably invested in more companies related to brown people and technologies than anyone in the world. In terms of the number of companies, the Slater Fund is invested in 135 companies. in 18 years. I've invested in 35, making me the most prolific Slater Technology Fund investor, but who's counting? And my estimate was that I look at 200 a year for 18 years, and then I looked at 50 in California when I ran something like the B Lab, but at Berkeley. So I did 2 years of that when I looked at 50 and invested in 5.
So did you say 200 pitches a year kind of?
I said 200 a year to do 2 so sometimes you kind of see a list and you count those, or you do this awful thing they call speed dating, where you see 20 in 2 hours. I don't really count that.
Okay. And just so you guys know, a pitch, there's a whole spectrum of what a pitch is. Sometimes the pitch is sitting in a coffee shop, there's no computer, there's no deck, but the entrepreneur is still sort of pitching their company. It's in a more informal kind of a thing. But we're counting those in these numbers, is that right? Or is it just the slide deck kind of pitch that you're...
I don't care if there's a slide deck or not, but I think it takes an hour to have a serious conversation.
Okay, all right, so an hour-ish type meeting is good, okay. How did we get from biological anthropology?
We call it human evolutionary biology now, Jason.
Is that what we call it now?
Yes, it's much
human
cooler.
Evolutionary biology?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. That's some weird outfit up in Cambridge.
That's what they call it now. We don't,
Human evolutionary biology? So how did we get from whatever the heck we call it, then back in the Dark Ages, the Pleistocene era versus...
Pleistocene, right.
Okay, Pleistocene, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, are you guys going to do for the rest of your life what you study in college? Probably not. That was the second thing I studied. The first thing was Greek. So.
Oh my God. Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, brother.
Yeah, so I don't know. I've done a lot of things.
All right.
So you don't have to draw a straight line from what you do in college or high school for that matter.
So at any rate, I think that's kind of an interesting takeaway message, and I hope you see it as a hopeful thing as a young person that you don't have to have this singular purpose in mind and somehow stick with it to be successful. But
if I had it to do all over again, I would probably be an engineer of some sort or be studying, It's not a bad plan to come out with a little bit of CS or have figured out how to write a scientific paper. That's a pretty good start. Right. You can read books the rest of your life, but yeah.
All right, so now you just
both ways
you just
work.
crushed the dreams of every history major.
Well, just don't do Greek, right? Don't do Greek.
All right, Ronak Massand is an entrepreneur, and so he's representing the other side of the field of battle, if we want to call it that, the other side of the table. And I met Ronak as a student in the Prime program here at Brown.
Yep.
And just to fill in, I do want to hear a little bit about how you ended up at Brown and whatnot. But Ronak distinguished himself in the Prime program in the following sense, that it's very typical in the program as it's run that the students are, I'm going to say, forced to study the opportunity of something really hard tech, super hard science, try to find a way to apply it, a market and whatnot. And then they're allowed to kind of, if they don't want to proceed with that, they can sort of go down a different pathway. And Ronak, and I would say, is it fair to say you sort of led a missionary movement away from plasmonic detectors or whatever it was, and started doing a software company. And now how long have you been doing Parkloco?
So it's been a little over 3.5 years now.
Okay, 3.5 years.
Yep,
all right, living the dream for 3.5 years.
It's not glamorous, I would tell you. It's not glamorous at all.
So tell us a little bit about what Parkloco does, and maybe just a quick arc of the financings that you've gone through, and we'll come back and dig into some of the dynamics of those.
So Parkloco is essentially a data analytics company in the parking industry. We have a software as a service for parking garages and lots where we help them understand their parking trends better through data and make better recommendations around pricing, staffing, managing the inventory in a data-driven way so that it's more profitable. The parking business is more profitable to them. But now we're kind of entering into this other side of the market where we are building this infrastructure that not just makes recommendations to the garages and the parking lot owners, but also helps them liquidate the inventory through different consumer channels, be it a parking app, a navigation app, a booking website. And the big dream is eventually, if we have built this infrastructure, when the self-driving cars become more commercial, we'll have this single universal data layer that can be plugged into these cars so that they would know essentially where they can go and store themselves. And we plan to combine that with not just the parking data, but also have charging station data, other maintenance data, so that the cars can go and make a good decision around where they can go and store themselves.
So it's, I got two kind of numbers questions for you. One is, how many pivots has Parkloco done? This is for the benefit of some of the B-Lab teams who have set new land speed records for numbers of pivots in 8 weeks, but...
I'm sure we've course corrected a number of times, but if in terms of like 2 hard pivots, I would say we have done at least 2 hard pivots. 2
hard pivots in 3 years?
Yep.
Because I remember in the early going, it really was an app to find parking spaces, right? Is that fair to say?
So
parking location, Parkloco.
Parkloco.
Yeah, okay.
So the inspiration came from a Brown technology. It was the low power RF transmitter that was being used by the School of Engineering in the BrainGate project. And we were essentially finding different applications. For one reason or the other, I thought, hey, these transmitters are really cheap. We can install them on the streets to figure out if a car is parked on it or not and build an app where people can go and find parking in real time. Eventually, we found out that building it through the sensors was not a great idea because it wasn't scalable, and there had been other projects in San Francisco that tried installing sensors, but it didn't scale.
Gotcha.
So we changed a little bit, but the initial idea was building a parking app that would help consumers find parking spots.
Right, so interesting. So the side of the question for you about the numbers is, how many pitches have you done, would you say? And let's use the same metric that Thorne suggested, sort of like one, so not elevator pitches, but an actual sit down, a full conversation with a prospective investor.
I would say at least anywhere between 150 to 200 pitches in my 3.5 years is what I've done.
Okay, so 150 to 200, that's a lot.
Yep.
And I think as we've been practicing,
150 to 200 formal pitches are long.
Does that seem high or low to you?
It's a lot.
That's a lot in that, yeah.
Got a lot of irons in the fire, though.
Yep.
So now the next painful question. Let's say it's 200, just to pick a number. How many of those 200 entities, people that you've wrote a check, an investment check, let's say, to Parkloco?
So we have a pretty complicated, messed up cap table. We have people that have invested anywhere between $5,000 to $300,000. But we have about 25 people on our cap table, so about 25 investors.
So that's a 1 in 8 ratio. That's I don't know. How does that strike you? Does that strike you as a good yield? 1 in 8.
Sounds about right, actually.
Is that Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're pitching angels,
Yep.
you'll need more to fill around. I think. If you pitch
good point.
VCs,
Good
you
point.
might
Yeah.
Have more pitches and less hits.
Yep.
Right?
I think the conversion also increases when you're pitching after having a term sheet, then like that's a different thing than like when you're just starting raising a round.
Gotcha.
So it might vary depending on where you are in your fundraising process.
Right. So you can see the dynamic. The venture guys, the investors, are sort of at the 1-2% level of pitches or of closes to pitches, and Ronak's at sort of the 12% level of investors to pitches. And so this is why in a breakthrough lab kind of environment, and I think even in Alden's thing, there's a lot of emphasis put on pitching because you spend a lot of time doing it.
Yep.
And you just can't get anywhere if you can't pitch. I think that's fair to say. So I want to talk briefly about just the arc of the process from when an investor walks in the door to an investor's shop to when the check gets written. And so I'm gonna ask Thorne first to just kind of walk us through what happens at Slater, and then how it's different for an angel group, let's say, and then maybe a corporate investor, because Jennifer said that she's a strategic investor as it pertains to Delta Dental, and so I'll be interested. I actually don't know the answer. Is it faster or slower for a corporate venture to write a check? So day one, hey, Mr. Sparkman, I got a great company. I'd like to come and talk to you. Just lead us through the high points.
So first of all, I would say it varies a lot. And second of all, I would say I wish it were shorter, but it's long and painful, really. I mean, if the entrepreneur and the investor fell in love with each other immediately,
okay,
which never happens. There's always...
But that's a good starting point.
Maybe there's sort of one-sided love, or maybe there's like, I'm really intrigued, and yet I have my doubts about, I like you, but you're trouble. So and then there's an entire diligence process. I think I would say it's always months.
Yep.
I would say that it's 2 months if it's love at first sight, and you start into diligence, quickly thereafter.
So the absolute breakneck 2 months.
And that never happens.
And that never happens.
And that never happens.
Okay, all right. Okay, so just for fun, take us to the other end of the spectrum. Maybe give us the mean, and then
I think I would say the mean. This is terrible, but I would say it is 6 months, because there has to be a meeting where you're really, really intrigued with something. And then if you're a smart investor, you'll bring in people to help you be skeptical, to have a kind of yeah, but meeting. People who should know better, even if you're intrigued. So, and that might take a while. You might have 2 or 3 meetings where someone like me would pull in someone skeptical. And it might be, I don't think I would ever make an investment in something like parking unless you talk to my buddy, the CEO of ParkSmart, and he's only here in the summer, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be at home,
right? All kinds of random stuff.
And then you might not like one thing about it. Geez, I like everything about this except that you don't have a first customer. So I'm really kind of, when you get that next thing,
Yep.
then come back and see me, but everything else I love. So that could easily add 6 months. If it's just a first customer, that could add 6 months. If it's a new teammate, that could add 2 years.
Gotcha.
So I guess I would say mean is 6 months if things go well and there are not a lot of extraneous kind of tasks and missions to do,
Gotcha.
which there kind of always are.
Right. And this plays so dramatically into the life cycle of early stage companies, because as we try to build a plan, an action plan for the company, if we forget that it's a 6 month, 8 month, 10 month process, it's so easy to just run out of money. Even if you had money in the bank and you're going to go out and raise more money, if you forget that it's a 10 month, whatever it is, process to get the next check in the door, it's so easy to just go bankrupt waiting for the next financing. And that's not even getting to the dynamic of never raise money when you need money kind of psychology, but it's just a very time-consuming thing. Are angels faster and better at this, or no?
Yeah, so it takes way too long. For Cherry Stone, we would usually tell founders, start raising about a year before you need it.
A year?
And so you spend the first 4 months trying to find an advocate within the group. So you have those coffee meetings, and you try to build that momentum, and you start meeting a couple of the Cherry Stone members, so that way, once you submit an application and it comes before us at screening, you have internal advocates when you leave the room.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
we would say start a year, and it will typically take 4 to 6 months from the time you submit to the time we invest. And 4 months is like light years for us.
Gotcha.
And that's
super
usually,
fast.
you have a negotiated term sheet and we're syndicating. And that usually still takes us 4 months.
So just to be clear what she's saying, if you walk into their door with Thorne already saying, I'm in, but I don't have enough money for the round, but here are the terms. If you walk in with the terms to Jennifer at Cherrystone, that's a huge accelerator, because it's kind of an up or down vote. The certain deal is on the table, the diligence has probably been done, but even that might take 4 months. One of the weird things about angel groups, and I think this is true even in the Boston angel community, is that they often only meet once a month or something.
Yeah.
To even, the pipeline has got these weird 1 month boundaries to see new deals.
Right.
And if you stumble at the month thing, you're dead to them for like a pretty long, I mean, what if you goof up, if you're in, and what are they, they're kind of like these rocket pitch things, they're like 10, 15 minute things. Yep. You guys tee up 4 companies of an evening, and you sit, it used to be you'd sit in the Slater offices, and the entrepreneurs are sitting like in the green room on at Oprah or something, right? They all know they're competing with one another for the love of Cherrystone, you know? And it's like, oh, good luck, and it's like, I hope he sucks, you know, that kind of thing. Out in the green, oh yeah, you're gonna crush it, I hope you suck. And then, but if you stumble then, you're kind of dead to Cherrystone for a pretty long time.
Yeah, so if you apply at the beginning of the month, we meet at Cherrystone at the end of the month. So right there is a month.
Oh,
From the
gotcha.
time that you've applied. So we take a look at your application.
But it would be rare for you
through.
to have an incoming deal, say June 1st, and actually have them in July 1st, right? Because you've already built your pitch table for how far out?
It depends. So sometimes the deal flow is cyclical.
Okay.
So the summer's super quiet. So don't try to raise a round in the summer. Just, at least if you're going to go with angels.
Yep.
Because they're typically retired, wealthy individuals who want to enjoy the Rhode Island summer. So
Gotcha.
it's hard to
Okay.
get a deal done. So if you don't have a term sheet on the table and a deal closed by July 4th at the latest, don't bother until after Labor Day.
Interesting. Which is just more time. You know, so I think the smart money on this deal is that if you say it's 6 months to raise money, that's if you start in September, you might raise by April of the next year. But if you start raising in April, add 3 months because there's this dead zone, and then add a month at Christmas. Right? Nobody does it,
Yep.
right?
Christmas.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the weird, it's not even just the decision, it's the dynamic, it's sort of the cadence
Right.
Yep.
of meetings and decision making and all this kind of stuff.
And if you use that lull to start building up the momentum within the group, so people will
that's
probably
a good idea.
be likely to take a coffee meeting with you during the summer if you can meet them close to where they're enjoying the summer.
To the beach.
So then, so then you start to develop those relationships and you foster that through. That way, when it gets to September, you have pretty good momentum
Right.
internally. So now
Right.
you can get into that pipeline and follow that process.
Interesting. So briefly, because I'm not sure that corporate strategic investing is the first thing that would come to mind for most B-Lab ventures, but some. How different is it, if at all, on the corporate strategic investing side? Speed, process?
Yeah, so we say no pretty quick. Because
Do you say no pretty quickly? No, you drag us through the mud.
It may be quickly.
You say maybe quickly. You say maybe quickly. Okay.
So
Oh my God.
So, we have our marching orders of what the kind of corporate pillars are
Gotcha.
for what we're going to invest in and what aligns with our corporate mission and what doesn't. So we only invest in certain sectors at certain stages. So for us, we have we have that pretty narrow filter. So we can take a meeting, and then if it's not in the dental space and it doesn't align with our mission, it's pretty
game
quick
over.
to
Yeah,
say
right.
no.
Okay.
If it does that, then it has to get into the process of I have to learn more, and then I have to take you to my boss and our senior staff, and we have to convince them.
So
And-
still a months-long process after you get through the first gate, or do you do teeth?
Yeah, no, it's a couple months, and that's
Okay.
if it's quick, right? So,
Okay, so it's-
if it's a clear parallel with what we're doing, and we love the concept, and everybody's excited,
Gotcha,
we'll take a
gotcha.
chance and maybe cut a smaller check initially,
Okay.
and then wait to see the momentum. But we typically will not negotiate the round. So you may come to us and we can say we love it, but you have to go get a term sheet from somebody else and then we'll
is
invest
that right?
alongside.
Okay.
So depending on the size of the round, we may not take that initial lead. We may let somebody else do that.
Gotcha. This notion of syndicating is a key concept in early stage investing, and one of the things that's so tricky is, and you've heard the word come out several times, is who's the lead. And that's not generally a legal term. Is that fair to say? It's a burden term. Which investor is going to accept the burden of doing the diligence, talking to customers, validating the customer interest, spending the legal money to generate the term sheet? And so some investor has to love this thing so much that they're going to take on that huge pain. And that's why other investors are like, we love spending money, we never lead, because we don't either have the bandwidth or the knowledge, or it's mostly probably bandwidth more than anything. We just don't. And so, or sometimes it's even written into charters. Sometimes investors cannot take the lead for some weird reason. So
yeah, we like to have other people in the boat with us.
Gotcha. So Ronak, I'm coming to you. Tell us just at a reasonably superficial level what it's like to talk to these chuckleheads and try to convince them to write a check, and also the timing. Because that is really. It's easy for these guys to say, oh, it's 6 months. It's like, when I'm running out of money, 6 months is a long time, my God. So what's your view of the whole thing?
Yeah, for an early stage company, I think 6 to 8 months can be at times lifetime of a company. So
right.
you have to take that into account. I think it's extremely important to prospect the investor, an investor before you're meeting the investor. I think and it sort of takes a learning curve to do that. Like my first 6 to 8 months, I would talk to anyone that had an investor title on the LinkedIn or something like that,
right,
without understanding the thesis of what they invest in. Because you have to understand, not every investor invests in early stage. So I was like talking to a private equity fund asking for $50,000, which is pretty embarrassing because they're never going to do it. It's not their thesis.
Right.
So it's extremely important to understand who you're talking to, prospecting the investor really well, and the way you can do that is look at their previous investments, see if they've led the round. If you want the investor to lead the round, see if the investor has led the round, see what their average check size is, and if that lines up with the round size you're looking to raise.
But otherwise, just don't even ask for the meeting.
I mean, if someone's not going to lead the round, there's no point. I mean, it's always great to network, but they're never going to take the lead. So,
gotcha.
So you just
don't waste their time. Don't waste your time. The emotional energy. Just.
I mean, I think if someone says that we would only invest if you would find a lead investor, then you only talk to that person after you have a lead investor.
Gotcha.
There's no point talking to them again without having a lead, because it's never going to happen.
Gotcha.
So you have to be realistic and you have to understand that not every investor is going to invest in your company. So you have to prospect them well based on their thesis, based on what they invest in, based on the verticals they invest. So that alone takes at least 4 to 6 months to just prospect the right group of investors that you want to target, that invest at the right stage. So that alone takes 4 to 6 months.
Gotcha.
And then once you have that curated list, then you're now taking chances, pitching to each one of them. Lining up a meeting takes extremely long if you're going through a cold LinkedIn or cold email.
Right.
So it's important while you're prospecting to understand what that common connection is that can set up an intro, which definitely helps you shorten the lag time of getting the meeting.
Gotcha. Interesting.
And from there, I've seen once you have the term sheet, it still takes 4 to 6 months for the diligence to
Okay, so all right, I think we've got that. I think we understand now. It's time consuming and whatnot. I'm going to ask you a question. Then if you can answer it right away, go ahead. If you need time to think about it, then I'm going to. So the question I'm curious about is, it's different from the one I was talking about earlier. This is what was kind of like the most thus far, because you're still a young entrepreneur, but thus far, what was the most palm slap, frustrating, I cannot believe what just happened in this investment type dialogue? Do you want time to think about that? It's just like, it's like you're going back to your partners, and you're like, God, and we're not going to curse on tape here, but it's like
So there was.
You're going to come up with it right now,
Yep,
huh?
yep.
Okay, all right.
So about a year and a half ago, after we have raised our first round of funding, our pre-seed seed round.
Do you feel comfortable telling us the amounts of money,
Yep.
but don't feel like you have?
No, so we've in total raised about $1 million in 2 rounds of financing.
Okay.
And now we're going through another round of financing.
Okay.
So
Are those different types of paper? Is it the 2 rounds so far?
So for us, all rounds are price rounds.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
the investing structure was pretty similar.
Gotcha, okay.
Except for obviously the valuations and all those things were different. But after we had raised our first round, which was a little over $600,000, we were talking to a pretty large strategic for about 2.5 to 3 months. Essentially, it was BMW's venture group. And we'd spent about 2.5 months with them. Their requirement was they needed a financial investor to lead the round.
As opposed to a strategic.
As opposed to a strategic.
So that's kind of an interesting dynamic. So Ronak's talking to someone like Jennifer,
Yep.
but in the automotive space.
Yep.
And they're saying, we like it, but we need to have him,
Yep.
the financial investor, before we can do the strategic. Okay, I love it. Keep
Yep.
going. All right.
And that was because they didn't have the infrastructure to carry out a diligence process.
They needed the financial guy to do the hard work.
Yep,
Thorne, have
yep.
you ever heard any of that BS before? Yeah, okay. All right. Pardon me?
At least that's what they said.
Okay.
So they were willing to essentially match the check size of the lead, but they just didn't want to do the diligence process.
Gotcha.
What we got from them. So we lined up a lead. One of our existing investors were essentially stepping up.
Okay.
So we lined up a lead, and they start the diligence process. We spend another month and a half with them, and they have people from Germany on
Another
call.
month and a half with BMW.
That would be BMW.
Gotcha.
Yep.
All right. So let me ask you, so is it strategic to tell BMW, I've got a lead and here's the person?
Yep.
And do you tell the person, I've got BMW,
Yep.
so everybody knows who's at the table?
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely. So once,
And the financial guy's probably excited if you've got BMW in the room at least.
right. So
okay.
if you think about it, you're just de-risking the company for any investor, be it a financial or a strategic.
Okay.
If you say BMW isn't interested, then the financial investor thinks
Okay.
there's less risk.
This is
in
great
investing.
tee up. I don't want to know how this turns out almost, but we got to hear it.
So what we got from them was they were doing a diligence, and they were planning on investing from their fund 1, which was a $100 million fund.
This is BMW.
This is BMW. And our round size was going to be about 1.5 to 2.5 million dollars. So they complete the diligence process, and towards the end, then I see a press release that, hey, BMW's announced another fund, which is a $500 million fund.
Wow.
My email inbox starts getting filled with all these Google ads and Google updates I've set up on BMW, and I see that, okay, they've raised another fund. And I talked to the managing director of BMW again, who was out of the New York office. And they were like stringing us along for a long time. They weren't giving us a commitment. We had the lead ready, but we were waiting on them. Finally, they come back with an answer saying, because we have raised a $500 million fund, our thesis has changed. And I don't know if that was just an excuse or not, but that's what we got from them, that, hey,
We raised so much money, we can't now invest
we
in
can't
you.
write a check of $1 million because our
It's
fund
not
is a
you.
$500 million.
It's not you. It's me.
What's that?
It's not you. It's me.
Yeah, it's not you, it's me.
Yep,
Right.
Yep. And that was like
That is a
really
slap in the
frustrating.
face. Oh, unbelievable.
So that was one of the most frustrating diligence processes we've been through, where like we had the term sheet, they were willing, they'd shown an interest, they'd shown decent
And now
interest.
they walked away?
They said, when you're raising a larger round, we would be interested. When the round size is over 5 million or so, that because now based on our new thesis.
Well, wait a second. So this is very confusing. Which is easier to raise? A small amount of money or a large amount of money? What, in your experience, is it?
I don't think any of it's easy.
Okay, fair. All right.
I mean, I think the tough part is, if you raise less than $1 million, if I'm looking at a company, I think you're not asking for enough because it's going to take longer. It's going to cost.
Does that
more.
mean that if you're asking for so little, that means you must not know what you're doing?
Or
does it mean that
like
you're really
friends and family
okay.
and individual investors? So it's like typically Cherry Stone would bring somewhere between 250 to 500K to the table. So if we're going to be the only investor, we don't want to do it. So we want to be a piece of the round.
Gotcha.
But we also don't want to be such a small piece that we don't have a difference in
Gotcha.
the round. So it's for us, it was kind of 1 to 3 million was our sweet spot.
For the full raise.
For the full raise.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if you try to raise more than that, then we're just not a good fit.
So if an entrepreneur comes and has a meeting and you go, we're really excited. We got this unbelievable venture and we're raising $100,000 to get to the next milestone. What's the next? What do you say at that point?
I mean, if it's a company who could get grants or could go through competition.
Do you see the grimace? She's grimacing. She's grimacing.
I've been in those pitches. I know that
grimacing.
feeling. It's like, what are, I think entrepreneurs need to think about what are those value inflection points in their growth cycle. And you kind of want to raise enough money to get to that inflection point.
Yeah.
And it's most likely not going to be 100K.
Yep.
But wait a second. You said you invest as little as 50. So
once
up
did
with
10. I once did 10. But
you once did 10.
I once did 10. But so I would say that the point Ronak makes is very important. You have to know a lot about the fund. So if you take a kind of typical closed venture capital fund that's $400 million, they're going to invest in $20 million in 20 companies. Or maybe $30 million, or $30 million in 15 companies, something like that. It takes as much time and effort to invest $100,000 as it does $1 million. So you have to call all the references of the people, you have to call all the customers, you have to do all the work and all the term sheet, all the same amount of work, and you're only gonna get a tiny amount of your pile invested. So
don't bother.
And then you're going to get the exact same amount of headaches if the company goes poorly.
Yep.
And if it goes out of business, it's just as big a blotch on your record. And so I guess in the end, you might as well do the one where you have a chunky amount of money to put to work, and maybe they won't be back begging for more within maybe it'll take 2 years.
Yep.
So there is an amount of money that's so small that it either, it's not interesting to the fund for financial reasons, or it maybe is signaling something about the entrepreneur's preparedness to think big or something like that.
I think that's another good point. If someone sort of says, geez, I think what we would like to get from you is $20,000, it doesn't.
And they're quaking they're quaking. They've never said a number that large in their whole lives.
Right. It doesn't suggest that, this is the thing.
Gotcha.
And they have complete confidence, and you're going to put 20 in and take 400 out, and you can say it without flinching.
Gotcha. Okay. So interesting. So this notion of the conversations that are happening between entrepreneurs and investors, this is a slightly different thing. And this is one of these, whenever you talk to experienced investors, they get all they go, investors invest in 3 things: team, and team. And they think they've said something really brilliant, right? We invest in team, and team. But and that may be kind of, there's a grain of truth to that, I know, but it raises a really tough question for early, sort of young, inexperienced, first-time entrepreneurs, first-time CEOs, maybe team members who aren't even out of college yet. What kinds of? I'll start with Thorne and then come to what. Do you invest?
Okay, so I think that is both. I think that is both true and important and painful. So I remember when I was finishing graduate school and doing my deal, which was not a very good thing. It was good in its own way. It was not going to make people $1 gazillion, and I didn't really know that at the time, that I wasn't a good fit.
Yep.
And I had been doing, B-Lab type things in Berkeley in the Bay Area where there were a lot of things like that, and no one had really told me. And
The team thing?
no, so I got this really great referral to a person who was a good fit for what I was doing, and I gave my pitch, and the person said, look, here's the kind of people we invest in. And he sort of said, this guy, super rock star, superhuman strength, can walk through walls, made $1 jillion, took it public, blah, 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 and gave me this list of people and was sort of name dropping. And at the end of that, I was like, well, so what's your point? What's your point?
You pretty much described me.
What's your point? That I'm not that, I just thought that was incredible. Can that be my painful moment, by the way, too?
Sure, if you'd like, sure.
Okay.
When you were told you weren't God?
When I was told I wasn't God, and here are the types of people, I felt like saying, I've never heard of you either, right? So,
that's a great way to seal the deal. That's a great way to win friends and influence people. I never heard of you either.
But it's so true, So how do you deal with that? I'm not really sure how you deal with that, other than to ignore it. Make that person pay in life for the rest of their life, right?
Oh, okay.
Come back.
It's a karma argument.
So what we used to say? I'm sorry you couldn't get excited.
I'm sorry, what was it?
I'm sorry you couldn't get excited. We're doing this.
Oh, that's what the entrepreneur says.
It's going to here. Yeah.
The entrepreneur says, I'm sorry you couldn't get excited.
I'm sorry you couldn't get excited.
Ronak, have you ever used that line? That's an awesome line.
I've never used that line, to be honest.
Okay.
Maybe next time.
Because
what else are you going to do?
What else are you going to do? Next time you turn down, I'm sorry you couldn't get excited.
Yep.
You're not going to change. So at that point, you've hopefully played whatever credibility card you have there. Maybe your college professor, who is a rock star in his own way, says he's the smartest person you ever had. Maybe you've broken down some kind of door and talked the BMW guy into loving you. Maybe whatever it is you've done to be superhuman to that date, that's what you have. If you were able to get something licensed out of Brown University by hook or by crook, or whatever you have is what you've got. And if they can't get excited, then fine. What you want to say is you snooze, you lose.
Gotcha.
I'm doing this. If you're not excited, that's great.
But do we tell them not to try?
No, the best investment Cherry Stone made was a grad student at MIT.
Is that right?
And he was hungry, and he executed, and he recognized the weaknesses that he had that were missing from the team, and he found rock star advisors who were willing to say, yep, I'll help you get through regulatory. Yep, I'll help you with your animal trial.
Interesting. Okay.
So it's kind of like if you be honest with yourself, know what you're awesome at, and why you're the best team to execute, and then round that out with that industry experience that maybe you don't have because you're a grad student. That's cool. We need somebody who's going to be scrappy and hungry and isn't going to expect $300K for a salary at a startup. So I think there's that balance. You need the scrappy, hungry entrepreneur, and you need the advisory board to help you get over those hurdles that maybe you haven't seen before, but the industry has.
So you've never found yourself, and I'll get you, you've never found yourself just turning away from an investment opportunity for the mere reason that they're too young, let's say.
If they don't have advisors, we have.
You have, okay.
And we'll say build out, if it was a medical team, build out your scientific advisory board.
Gotcha.
Build out folks who know how to get through regulatory. If it's tech, build out people who know how to sell into this market, who have those ability to open up the initial
there's this kind of
testers.
demeaning phrase that's like, come back to us when there's an adult in the room. Or we need to see some gray hair. And there's all these kinds of weird things that people say to young entrepreneurs and it can be discouraging, I think. So Ronak, you had...
so we've been in that spot before our first round of funding. Our lead investor, NXT Ventures, their biggest concern was we didn't have someone on the team who could sell into the parking industry because it's a closed circle.
Gotcha.
And there was, and you just have to be a little realistic about it. Obviously, it is discouraging. But then I think one of the things I do, I ask every investor, what is your biggest concern? And if we can solve that, then would you be more interested or more excited about this?
Okay.
So that was their biggest concern, that there wasn't anyone who could sell into the parking industry. And we turn around, we start talking to all parking executives, just asking for advice, seeing what we can gather. In about a month and a half, we find someone who's willing to come in. He's a senior exec. He has more than 20 years of experience in selling into the parking industry. And we come back to NXT and we say, okay, if that was your biggest concern, here's our guy. He's willing to join us if you fund it. He's willing to take a pay cut. He's willing to take the risk. And that's a great validation.
Did that carry the day?
It did.
It carried the day.
Yep.
Way to go.
NXT ended up leading our first round.
Way to go.
And that's how things happen for us. So you have to be realistic about it. If you have to constantly think about how you can de-risk the company for investors. When someone tells you that this is their biggest concern, if it is something you can control, then you go and solve it.
Gotcha.
Rather than just be discouraged and do nothing about it.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting.
But make sure that whoever's picture you put on your slide deck is prepared to answer questions from investors, because we would get into due diligence and we're like, oh, we want to talk to that 35-year industry expert, and you call them up and they're like, who?
People have actually done that?
Yeah. They lose instant credibility.
It's
if
game
you've
over,
had
right?
one conversation with a guy who said, yeah, this is really cool, don't put him as a board member or an advisor. Because if we call and we have that conversation, now we start wondering, what else have you fabricated or really enhanced the truth?
Yeah, right.
So just make sure that those advisors have said, yes, we're going to help you, and have been active with your company.
Well, and to the extent that you have knowledge that somebody's doing diligence on your company, that heightens the necessity to do that for exactly that reason. So I'm curious, just a couple more questions that I have, and then I want to invite you guys, so be ready to ask some questions. Is there a minimum, why don't we call it sort of level of doneness for the venture that makes it investable? I'll phrase it, what are the minimum things that a venture needs to be able to say they have accomplished already? And maybe, so your investor said you haven't accomplished what I think is key, which is to get the industry expertise in the company. But just in general, what are the minimum entry points that would keep the conversation going? What do you think, Thorne?
I kind of work backwards from the same way you would value a company. So you think of it as how many profits do you have, and let's multiply that by 20. Oh, you don't have profits yet? How much revenue do you have? Well, let's multiply that times 6. Oh, you don't have that yet? Do you have a product yet that maybe a customer's using but hasn't paid for? You got some of those, right? Someone I can call that says where they can say, well, I haven't paid for it.
You actually go through this process? You walk the fences and or just it comes out so quickly, but you're...
How am I going to evaluate it, right? If someone's, if they're already selling stuff and they sold more this year than last year and it's already profitable, then you know that is a evidence of satisfied demand. Not only is there someone has a need, they're willing to part with money, enough money that you can make a profit. If you don't have that, then it's like, oh, well, can you give me the phone number of anyone who said they might even think about trying this? If you can't do that, then it's like, well, can you show me the thing or maybe a picture of it? And if you don't have that, then it's like, it's going to be tough for me to figure that out.
Gotcha.
So somewhere between product meets demand equals, in the face of a customer equals sales and profit, somewhere along that. So unless we're talking about, alchemy, where if it works, you can, turn hay into gold, and we just don't have the product right yet. Then I'm thinking there's got to be a product a customer can see. Otherwise, there's just a kind of double line of people who do have that. I think
Who
that's
are already ahead of that
I think
point,
that's
yeah.
where I would personally draw the line. I'll talk to anyone and look forward to talking to all of you guys. But in terms of thinking about would I invest in something, there would have to be the germ of, oh my gosh, this is going to make some customer very happy. And that's really a product.
And there may be a circumstance where your investment is a commitment to continue a helpful conversation and being sort of an unofficial advisor to somebody, and maybe that's kind of what you're offering to these guys. Don't burden our conversation with the notion that I'm going to invest, because I'm probably not right here, right now, except unless something extraordinary is going to be presented. But I can still be helpful, and I'm sure you did that many times at Cherry Stone. It was like the answer's no, but I think you're headed in the right direction, or something like that. And Ronak's like, yeah, I got lots of people who said no.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's why he's like, oh, that sounds good, but that's a pain in the ass. So
I think it kind of goes back to how you're prospecting the investor, because the level of doneness would be different for different investors.
okay, fair, yeah.
So, but even at early stage, I think you have to be. It's really hard being an entrepreneur to be objective about your own company, because this is something you've started, this is your own baby and stuff like that. But I think you have to be objective, and you have to think about how the investor is thinking about the company. What are the risks that they are thinking this company has? And if you don't have answers to those questions, then essentially it's not done yet. Like, you have to de-risk the company for the investors. That's how you're going to get anyone excited.
Yeah,
So-
we want to see that external validation.
Okay.
So for us, we'll have initial conversations. So if you think about that funnel, the 300 to 500s, like, you sent me a business plan. People who actually segue, that makes sense to have an in-depth conversations, probably about 100. And the rest are just too early, not a good fit. Kind of
Gotcha.
in that.
Yep.
So once you start kind of getting down there, then it's going to be, who have you talked to? Show me what you've done.
Yep.
Have you executed on a plan?
Yep.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't have revenue yet, but do you know how you're going to monetize it?
Mm-hmm.
And have you talked to people that are not your friends and family and gotten that,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I would pay, and this is about how much I'd pay for it?
Mm-hmm.
And have you done pilots? Do you have animal study? Whatever your industry is,
Yep.
there's
Mm-hmm.
going to be kind of certain check marks that we're going to have
Right,
to check, and if
right.
not, it's going to come.
And if
too
the
early.
entrepreneur really believes in what they're doing, and there are these either spoken or unspoken minimums to be investable, then it's just on them to keep making progress. Is it the credit cards and Uncle Jack, and is that how we make progress?
Or you find those individuals.
Thor's like, yeah.
I mean, sometimes.
Sorry, dude, I can't help you with that piece. Yeah.
You have to try to segue with somebody who can accept that risk.
Do you like
balance.
companies that have gone out and done crowdfunding? They've done Kickstarter and these different things. Is that smart, or is that a waste of time?
I mean, Kickstarter for us is kind of cool because it's the market validation. So
Okay,
it's people who,
even if you're just using it for pre-sales, kind of,
Yeah.
it's not an equity play per se.
right,
but
equity I think is a completely different ballgame, and I'm not sure
okay.
I would play in that ballgame.
You're negative on crowd equity.
I don't know enough about it to be comfortable with it.
Okay, all right. Thorne, do you like crowd equity?
I don't know that much about it. A lot of people use it as ways to generate demand, or if you can possibly raise money from your customers, that's the best possible place to get it.
Even
So
if it's a pre-sales kind of thing. It's
I
not an
think that
equity.
would be incredible. If you
Okay,
could, if
nice.
You could get
Did you
money,
hear that? Incredible.
Incredible. If you could get money from your customers without giving them the product yet, then that's even better. So yeah, if you could it's competitive. It's really competitive
On
now.
Kickstarter?
I don't know that much about it.
Gotcha.
I'm told it's incredibly
Gotcha.
competitive, but it seems like a good way to do it. But the more you can shorten the distance to proving that a customer is going to buy the thing, the more that you can prove demand. Is the dog going to eat the dog food? Then you don't have to kind of hand wave about it. You can say, talk to my customer. He had the problem, so I bought the widget. So,
Yeah, right.
Getting that part done proves a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is why software is such a great business, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I think, a company like Parkloco isn't really amenable to a Kickstarter kind of deal. parking lot managers are not trolling Kickstarter for new tech.
Yeah, not every company is a good fit for Kickstarter. You need to have a consumer product that you can get people excited about. But having said that, I know that in this day and age now, there are a lot of other platforms, like I know one called Net Capital out of Boston, which allows even software companies to do equity crowdfunding. Is that a great thing? I'm not sure. I haven't been through it.
Gotcha.
I can see how, like being an entrepreneur, when you're just trying to get 50K to 100K in the door, it might be helpful. You have a network. But again, as an investor, it's still kind of like a friends and family thing. You haven't really validated anything. So that's how I think about crowdfunding.
Cool. Okay, last question from me, and that is, we talked a little bit about this outside. So this is what's the most irritating thing that entrepreneurs do when they're either irritating or nettlesome, or it's just like, I can't believe yet again. What do you have?
There's a couple.
A couple.
Don't tell me your projections are conservative, because everybody else tells me your projections are conservative.
Okay, don't, see this hockey stick? And that's conservative. So don't tell me this is a conservative estimate.
So
all right,
we'll
that's a good one.
Don't copy and paste your whole Excel sheet on a PowerPoint slide and say, I know you can't read this, but on this line over here, in year 5, we're going to get to $100 million, which is only 10% of the market.
Okay.
So I think kind of try to be realistic when you go in there. And I'm not a big fan of the tag team pitch. I feel like it wastes a lot of time.
Okay.
So if you are with a co-founder who you can really nail that and keep it succinct and move together, that's great. A lot of teams can't. So there's kind of a jumbled pitch, and then that gets difficult for us in that initial meeting to really understand what you're doing in 10 minutes. So
interesting.
Those would be my.
And that's for these kind of like the monthly initial experience thing. So trying to have a choreographed thing is more distracting than helpful in a way.
Right.
Okay.
Shark Tank makes it look awesome, but it's not.
Interesting. Okay, Thorne, the thing that just so irritating.
I'm not a big fan of the fake TV commercial beginning to the pitch.
What is that? The fake TV commercial?
Where it starts off, how many times has this happened to you? Say you're stuck outside, you need something, that kind of, not wild about that.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
How many have you got like this?
You'd be surprised.
Really?
That's surprising.
How many times have you caught yourself, bucking 6-foot waves on Narragansett Bay? And how many times has the clip top popped off on your hand and you can't? Right. All right. Yeah. God, that's interesting.
Pretty frequent gong show.
Really? Yeah. Okay. And so Ronak, the thing, and I drew out the most frustrating sort of story, but as you think back on the many meetings you've had with people, it's just like you just shake your head like, God, I can't believe they did it to me again.
I think one of the things is when certain funds I've come across, they don't have a fixed thesis, and it's not.
They don't have what?
They don't have a thesis. So,
I see. Got it.
So then it's really
when he
hard
says thesis, he means an investment thesis.
Right.
This is what we're trying to achieve for our investors, our limited partners. So if they don't really have a game plan,
then the expectations are not lined up, and I think that sort of leads to a lot of problems. Also, certain funds, I think, even when they're not ready to invest, they wouldn't let you know because they're raising their own funds or something like that. And time is everything for an entrepreneur of an early stage company.
Gotcha.
So whatever.
So they're not transparent about their capacity or willingness, readiness to do any investing, let alone in you.
Yep.
Oh, that would be irritating.
I've seen a couple of funds in Boston that were in between funds, and they were raising their own funds.
And they're still taking money, they're still taking meetings.
They were still taking meetings, and I can understand why.
They're building the pipeline for the next fund,
right.
But guess what? You're not going to be alive by the time they close their fund.
Exactly.
Yeah, I gotcha.
So I think that was one of the most frustrating things. It was a learning curve that, okay, that can happen too. You would never think going into a meeting that a fund cannot. Forget about investing in your company. Cannot invest right now.
Right. They've spent all their money in the present fund, and
yep.
yeah. Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to stop and I'm going to just call on people who have questions for any one of these guys. Pablo.
So I'll ask.
And then Amelie, are you next? Okay, Pablo, go ahead.
I'll ask a question to Ronak first, and I'll open it up to the investors. Have you ever refused to take money from an investment?
From an investor?
Investor, yeah.
So he's asking, just so that has he ever refused to take money from an investor?
Yeah.
Who's actually offered to give him money? Okay, that's an interesting question.
Yes, when the round was full.
Oh, okay. You're too late.
Yeah, there's a round size, and if the round is full, then essentially you cannot.
What are you driving at?
I'm just curious.
Okay, I didn't know if there was a subtext, like you found something out about the investor and said, I don't want your money.
Like the equity share was too big for what you were trying to do.
So we haven't been in that situation. I know other companies that have been where like they couldn't agree on the term sheets, or the terms were the entrepreneur just couldn't take the terms. But luckily, I've never been in that position where I had to walk away from a term sheet just because I thought the terms were way too crazy or something like that.
Gotcha. Okay.
And
Did you have another one?
I have a question for the investors. What would you say the optimal strategy for entrepreneurs when they're approaching VC?
Optimal strategy to what?
Optimal strategy for
Obtaining funding.
obtaining funding.
I'd say, talk to me before you need money. So if I've met you like 6 months before you're going to start knocking on my door to raise money, I'm going to see you 6 months prior. And then if you really execute on your plan and get a lot done in those 6 months, I'm going to have more confidence in your team than when you hit me initially, because then you kind of leave the door open where I can say, well, you're still a little early, so why don't we wait 6 months, see how you execute, and then follow up. So almost kind of networking before you need the money.
Okay, that's interesting. Is that kind of what you're? I mean, there would be a long answer to that, but Amelie.
Yeah, I was just thinking, sometimes it's hard to justify exactly how much money you need, and when you say, oh, you should at least ask for like $1 million, I'm like, well, we don't really need $1 million. That feels weird asking for $1 million just because, like, right now, I might maybe need money in like a year. Even then, I don't think I would need $1 million. Like, I don't know, how do you, like, what is a legitimate thing to ask money where you're like, my server costs are gonna go through the roof? And I don't know, like, should you exaggerate that how much money you need?
Okay, interesting.
No, so the amount of money that you should ask, so first of all, you're probably going to, most of these companies ask for money 5 or 6 times. Yep. So you're not asking for the amount of money that you need to run unprofitably for 6 years until you can turn a profit. You're actually asking for enough money to prove some point such that you can ask for more money, really. The average time between venture capital rounds is 18 months. Yep. So you want to say, don't think of it in absolute terms, like I should really ask for $1 million. Think of what point you want to prove, and then ask for enough money to get, kind of just beyond that point. So, and these things change. It used to be that you asked for what we call a Series A, which used to be the first investment in order to build a product, and a Series B in order to sell it. And all those things have changed now. But the break points are kind of the same. So it's usually, I would say there's money to build and hopefully sell the first one product, and then money to, scale, which basically just means sell more.
But I think one of the thing about
get to figure out a milestone-based achievement plan and ask for 110% of the money you need to get to the milestone is what I would say. But we can talk about. Is yours a software thing, by the way?
If that number.
Yeah. So.
I can build that product. Like, we have a team. We're building the product. We're testing it with people. Like, we're already doing this, and we don't need $1 million to do it, right?
Yeah, so what I would say is, first of all, I want to introduce Lou Gersha, who's in the back. Raise your hand, Lou. So Lou works at the Slater Technology Fund, but he knows more about building software companies than I will ever know, since he's built and sold 4 companies, including one 2 weeks ago, in the last 25 years. So first of all, this is a longer conversation, and you and I should talk, and you guys should talk with Lou, and think about what is going to prove your point the most. And look, it's really hard to raise money. It's really hard to raise $1 million, really hard. So if you can prove a point with less, then ask for less. That would be a very logical thing
Just
to do.
knowing that at a particular level of the ask, you're going to fall below the radar screen of certain classes of investors.
Yep.
Exactly.
And don't worry about it. So if you only need 50 grand, there's certain investors you should not waste your time on, because they don't want to invest that little money.
Yep.
But don't gratuitously, blow up the budget in order to get to a level to make it appealing to.
Exactly.
Get the right amount of money, and then go find the right type of investor for whom that level of financing is comfortable.
And can I just say that I told you I invested $10,000 once?
Yes.
That guy asked for $75 million.
Is that right?
$75 million.
70.
I was like, all
And
right.
did he take your 10,000
He
bucks?
did.
He took your 10,000.
He did.
But
Unbelievable.
I think it's
yeah.
a good exercise for your company to think about, if somebody gave you $1 million, what would you do with it? And maybe you can sprint faster because you can hire a couple more developers. So I think try to think about, if somebody gave you, not that you're going to ask for it, but if somebody gave you $1 million, how would you spend it? And if you would just hold $850K in the bank and gain interest, then you probably only need the 150. But if you have other ways that you could scale faster, develop faster, maybe get that bigger client because you can hire a salesperson, then that's where you start to round out what you really need for the race.
Cool. Other questions? Adam.
So I'm in the process of redoing all our financial projections from scratch.
All of your process of redoing
All of our financial projections.
financial projections. Gotcha. Okay.
That's what I've been doing for about a week and a half. I have one advisor who says, don't do it, it's useless, projections mean nothing, it's all abstraction. Another that says you have to do it and show that you've done your due diligence, you understand the model. I have another that says you need to show $1 million in revenue in year 5. And I'm curious, from your perspective, on these 3 more data points, what do investors look for in a 5-year financial projection? I'm really happy with the base of it. I'm not going to say it's conservative, but it's based on 101 schools, the addressable market, target market, what would you do within 3 months of each school, plot it out over 10 semesters. Like, it's based in really awesome stuff, but at the end of the day, it shows $7 million in revenue in year 5, and is an investor going to be like, it's not $100 million, it's useless, or...
Well, so that's a different question. So let's start with the question, how much effort to put into pro forma financials and projections at all, leaving aside the amount?
So my background is in finance, so I use your projections to get into your head about how you think your business is going to scale. So somebody who has a marketing background may look at your marketing plan, somebody may look at your sales plan, whatever the case may be. For me, I'm a numbers person, so I'm going to dig in deep to your projections to just see kind of how do you see that business scaling and what do you think is achievable. After year 3, I'm probably not going to put a lot of thought into years 4 and 5 because they're probably just a formula that's a multiple off of year 3. And it's also, the market may change, things may be different, you may have competitors, but for those first 3 years, I'm gonna see who do you need to hire, what do those look like, how much you're gonna spend on marketing, sales. So it's answering the same questions that somebody may ask a different way, just using your projections to
But to put
answer.
one of his advisors apparently says, just don't even bother. It's all smoke and mirrors and abstract. Don't even bother with financials. Was that acceptable? Just
Don't go to a financial investor.
don't go. Okay, fair. Thorne, you're also.
I mean, I guess I would say every story is a financial story in the end.
Okay.
Right? So if you're asking them for $1 million, you're kind of promising they're going to get $10 million back, which means you're going to
show us how.
Right. Yeah. So, and also saying I don't have it is not really an acceptable answer.
So that's interesting. I don't think they want to know how much you're going to spend on paper clips in the 4th month of the 3rd year. but you gotta show them that you've done. I'm reading these guys that you've got to have done some level of diligence on the numbers.
I remember Bill O'Farrell would say every time, I'm pretty sure some of these numbers are wrong. You know, just like it's sort of a joke, which you.
But he had the numbers.
Yeah, and after you've taken companies public, I guess that's maybe a funnier joke than.
Gotcha.
But then I did it. But people know they're not the right numbers, and I think it's more how you talk about them. So I think there are wrong numbers. I guess I would say there used to be a thing on the web by this MIT Enterprise Forum guy called Woodward. What's his?
John Woodward, the rules of thumb stuff.
Yeah. Where, you know, if you violated any of those kind of rules, you could be dinged for it. So, you know, gross, you know, there are things that just don't really happen where you could betray your own, naivete.
Yeah,
so I wouldn't do that. I would stay within, you know, the kind of
business
laws
norms
of nature.
Yeah. Okay.
But I would be able to defend key numbers. So
key assumptions.
It's pretty easy for someone like me to say, how do you expect to double every year for 3 years? You know, right? Which they'll say. Right. And if you said, geez, I don't know, it's guesswork, isn't it? Then that would be silly. But if you said, well, here's what two companies that look exactly like mine did. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think I can do at least that well. Or, you know, there's a bunch of ways you would, if you haven't thought about it, then you haven't thought about it. So I would be.
But that's not good to not have thought about it.
Right. No.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
Is that good enough, Adam, for now?
And happy to look at your numbers as always, Adam.
Okay. Next question, Stephen.
So this is for the investor. So thinking of companies that you eventually say yes to after 6 or 9 months, but the due diligence just takes a while. What can grease those wheels? What can the companies give you that would just make that process like smoother or easier?
So great question.
Since you just repeat
the question is, how can you make diligence go faster? So, you know, some people say diligence is the stuff you overlook if you really want to do a deal, and the stuff you cite if you really don't. But at some point, the person doing it, the person like me, has responsibility to do things, and responsibility when they then say to their buddy, "Oh, you really ought to invest in this." That's sort of saying, I'm taking some personal responsibility that, you know, I've talked to these customers and stuff. And when you go to finally do that work,
the diligence work,
it's phone calls.
Yeah, phone calls.
It's 12 phone calls, right? It's 2 references for each of the 3 team members. It's 3 customer references. It's an industry expert and something. So, I mean, why not make it easy for the person, right? Why would you not say, as that, you know, and people give off these little clues. The investors will say during the meeting, "Oh, geez, I'd have to verify that, you know, X, Y, Z." You should just stop, write that down, say, "Oh, would talking to so and so fit that bill?" Okay, fine. Got you on record as saying you'll, you know, without being that obnoxious. So in the end, I think if you can give somebody a list of names, and now they may say, "Oh, well, I know these people are gonna say nice things about you." They may not. They may just call them and say, "Oh yeah, has he been in prison? Is he your brother?" Okay, fine, right? That happens. Believe me, I've done that. But given a list of people, and don't give a list of people unless you know what they're going to say, by the way, but that is a way to do it. And if you said to me, hey, this person is, you know, sometimes I'll look at a list and say, ooh, that person's the head of BMW Ventures. I'd actually like to talk to that guy. I'd like to meet him. I'll sometimes do a little diligence just to meet the guy. That's terrible, but whatever. So you might say, you know, this guy's pretty busy. So why don't you let me call him and figure out what the way, just so I know, just so you put me on notice that, like, don't waste this frickin' guy's time. If I give you the list, make sure, I think that would make me take you and the people you put on the list more seriously. And if you've done that, and then you came back to me and said, okay, these 3 important people are ready to take your call, and I don't do it for 2 weeks, I think you have a right to be indignant. I think you have a right to call me back and be like, how'd it go with the head of so-and-so that I teed you up with? Oh, I didn't call him. What, right? So I think that you can and should and will need to, as an entrepreneur, isolate the questions that the guy might have concerns about, even if it's you, especially if it's you, and customize that package of things that the person has to do, realizing that in the end, it's probably 12 phone calls.
Cool.
Great, that's a great question.
Looking for other questions. Ryan.
Over the years, like seeing the deals you've done, do you think when the companies don't do as well, I guess it's pretty general, but have you seen that it's usually the team that works on this? Or it's
Can I talk about that? Team.
Yep.
So reasons for failure is the question. What's the common, and is it, do you put it at the feet of team as one possible thing?
I guess like with the product,
was it the product that failed? Was it the team that failed? Okay, interesting.
So the team can change the product, right?
Yeah.
And especially early stage, you're never going to end up doing the business plan that you start off with. So especially at seed stage investments where you're not evaluating, you're not comparing 2 products and which light bulb lasts longer and blah blah. The team really is that important. The team thing we talked about before. I would say that the best 2 CEOs that I ever invested in, I got a 0 on both of them. And the best exit.
When you say got a 0 on both, just explain.
$0 came back at the end of the investment. Didn't work out.
Gotcha. But they were your 2 best CEOs.
2 best CEOs.
Gotcha.
And that the best if you just measure it by the numbers, the best investment I ever made was a Brown student who was a year and a half out of college when I first met him, Charlie Kroll.
So in answer to the question, so the two things that zeroed out were not due to team in those 2 instances.
The team is the most important, but
that was not the cause of the failure.
Every fact that I said in the rest of the
I gotcha.
Philippic was
okay.
To the contrary.
So there were failures that could not be ascribed to team, your experience?
So if you use the saying, the jockey or the horse, you can have a great jockey, which is the team. If you have a 20-year-old mare who's been out to pasture for 10 years, you're not going to win the race. So if the horse is really the idea, you need that kind of perfect marriage between a good team that knows when to pivot, that knows when to iterate, that can get that horse across the finish line. If you don't have a good horse to start with, we've passed on deals that were fantastic teams that we hated their idea. And it's a really hard conversation to have when it's the reverse, right? It's a great idea, but you don't like the team, because then you have to try to make up a lot of other excuses because you don't want to call the team out on the fact that you don't like them. But when it's the team, you can kind of give them the framework of saying, maybe if you were to focus it a little bit differently and let them pivot and then come back. But for the deals that have failed, it was the team that didn't know when to pivot when the market pivoted, or they really didn't think about the financing and what they needed to raise at what inflection points, and the deal would wither on the vine because it was too much for angels to invest in and not enough for VCs that were validated, so it would just die in the process. So I think, a team can only ride it so far. It's got to be that marriage between the 2.
Any other questions? Lee? And then Phil, you're next.
I just had a quick question about this issue of prospects or investors. And how do you go about that process without sort of being slimy? And like, what do you talk about in these final meetings that you need to have before you actually, get the check if it ends up like that?
I think there are a lot of websites out there that let you at least understand the basic fund thesis. So if you go to Crunchbase and if you look for a fund, and you can get a list of like, okay, what their previous investments have been. So let's say if a fund has made 30 investments and they've never led a round. So you can quickly understand that this is not probably going to be your lead in the next round. So obviously you can use websites like AngelList or Crunchbase to get a quick understanding of what the fund thesis is. But in your first meeting, you always ask you always ask what the fund's concerns are, how you can de-risk the opportunity further for them, what their thesis is, what their previous investments have been. It's also not wrong to do your own diligence. You can ask from an investor, can I talk to a portfolio company and see how you guys work? How often do you meet? If they're going to come on your board, how does the board function? Because those are critical things. So it's important as an entrepreneur to drive those things. So I would say, I think the basic prospecting can be done through the websites, but in your first meeting, always ask these questions about the thesis of the fund and what they invest in.
And maybe even include, are you actively investing?
Exactly.
You don't have to say, do you have any dry powder or whatnot, but how does this conversation fit into the fund that you're now investing out of, or some kind of way to.
Right. And that is something that you also, like Crunchbase would also tell you that if a fund hasn't invested in a year and a half, then probably they're not actively investing.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of both. Because
sometimes the investors will rat each other out, won't they? If you say, well, we talked to so and so, they go, they're not they're spent.
Yep.
Those guys.
The investment bankers will do that.
Yeah, the investors will. Yeah, the investors will rat each other out, right?
Investment bankers will do that.
Investor who?
The investment bankers will do that. They'll say out of money. That guy's out of money.
Gotcha.
By the way, so the Slater Senior Director of Internship, Tommy Davis Jr., raise your hand back there. He has just completed a search of every angel group and seed stage investor from New York to Maine that has invested. What was the search?
The criteria was companies that are angel and VC companies that were located in Mass, Connecticut, Rhode Island, who had investments of 3 or more since the beginning of 2015 that were located in Mass, Connecticut, or Rhode Island.
Local investors investing locally, done more than 3 in the last 3 years, between 150 and 2 million.
Yep. Parkloco was on there.
No.
Parkloco was on there getting invested because he has the most prolific. NXT is
they're one of the most aggressive.
Raymond is one of the best seed stage investors in.
Well, so Parkloco is on the list not because they were shown as a portfolio company.
His investor is investor is one of the most.
Would B-Lab folks be able to access this Tom's database?
Sure. We'll just send. If you give Tom your card, he will send you that. And let me add. So that's a starting point. That's a list of names. And then I would go read about them and look on Crunchbase and stuff and see what they've invested in. But I would not make the first question. So, what do you guys do here? What do you... Because I would say, well, why didn't you frickin' Google that in the waiting room while I was waiting? It shows that you haven't really done your homework.
Yep.
It's a sign of weakness and lack
Well, to
of
the extent that the data is available and it's reliable.
Yes.
Yeah, gotcha.
And strategics tend to be more stealthy about what we've invested in the past. So it's kind of learning about the companies that are in your industry and then trying to find if they have a corporate venture arm. Because that's, you're not going to come to me, who's in the oral health space, if you have a software company that's, helping with parking. That's not going to work. It's going to be a big hit and miss.
Gotcha. Phil?
Yeah, so my venture is a beverage company. And one of the things we're struggling with is that our sort of growth trajectory and when we're going to need money is very different from, like, say, a tech company. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice for ventures that are struggling to figure out how their venture fits with sort of a traditional funding timeline, or like round sizes, that kind of thing.
So talk to entrepreneurs in your sector who have raised money. So Cherry Stone invested in Narragansett Beer. So if you talk to the CEO of Mark Hellendrung, he'd probably tell you kind of how he was able to overcome maybe some of those initial hurdles with investors. And if you talk to folks who, through Crunch Space, are in the beverage space, who have raised money, they probably will be able to give you probably better expertise, at least than I can.
And Mark did Nantucket Nectars.
Scott.
Scott Hellendrung.
It's Mark.
It's Mark.
Mark did the beer. The
I thought
Nantucket Nectar guys were.
I think Mark was with them.
He was. Yeah, different
I
dudes.
think he was in sales.
He was?
I think Mark was in
Oh, I
sales
didn't realize that.
before.
Okay. Anyway, is that a adequate answer?
There's a whole history of people from Brown doing.
Yeah.
Food and beverages. And
Yeah, including the guys from the
Farmer
alcoholic
Willie's.
ginger
Willie's.
beer, right?
Yeah.
And you can make small batches of that stuff from what's that brewery in Pawtucket?
Oh, Isle Brewers?
Yeah, you don't need to have your own. There's lots of ways to do it on short money.
But I think Phil's issue is that it's in order to get a proof of concept pilot, it might only be $100,000 or something, and we're dissing this $100,000 level. That's not going to be.
Is that your question?
Something like it's.
Yeah, well, without getting too into the weeds of our specific thing, we know like we can make it out of our kitchen for like a couple $1,000, but to scale to like actually providing stuff to a food service, it's going to be on the order of a couple $100,000.
Okay. So the first thing you want to make sure, like, is it legal to make it in your kitchen? And probably a pretty good question.
They already know that's not legal.
Okay. And then the next thing is how much would it cost to prove, will the dog eat the dog food, or in your case, will the, person on the beach drink the beer? And the scale-up question, why would you even worry about, can you scale it up till you figure out if someone wants to drink it? I think that's the way I would think about it.
Okay, last question. Ruby. And then these guys can hang for a little bit afterwards, so you can come and hit them with your specific stuff. But go ahead, Ruby. We'll give you the last word.
When it comes to taking on companies, are you more willing or less willing to take on like a single founder or a team?
Oh, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. So it's another kind of team question, but down to, is a single founder an acceptable investment?
I've done it a lot, and I think it's a terrible idea.
It's a lot on one person.
It's almost impossible. I mean, it's like just too lonely and not. I would say 3 is a better number than 2 also, but I'd say 2 is better than 1. And I have done and work with some great founders. It's just so hard. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. Okay, with that, I'm going to call an end to the formal thing. Can we thank our guests?